Hello, everybody. I'm Kylie Donia. So for those of you who haven't yet met me, I'm the newer member of the K-12 education team here at Esri. But I'm not new to Esri. So I've been at Esri for about 17 years, previously working on our mobile apps and particular data collection apps. And so this is actually one of my favorite sessions because we get to combine data collection and education. And I find that kids get really excited and interested when you look at maps and talk about how they can actually put their own information on that map. And what's one of the best ways for kids to put their information on the map? Well, data collection, right? Then you can go out and do some research. Now, maybe that's their own observations, or maybe it's through talking to other people in interviews. But part of that information they're going to capture is where, and that puts their data onto the map. Now, before I get going too far here, I need to fix the title because this session isn't just going to be about data collection. It's going to be about data collection projects. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference there. But the biggest thing is we're going to go beyond just the basics of data collection, of having a form, filling out that form, collecting information, and also talk about how these data collection projects can come to your classroom and the benefits your kids will get out of them. Now, it's a session on data collection. How could I not have you fill out a form? So please go ahead and either scan this QR code or enter the URL and fill out this quick survey. It's just a couple questions and we're not even going to look at it right now. Now don't worry, the lower left corner, you can see that same QR code and URL. So if you didn't get a chance to scan it, you can go ahead and do so now and fill that out. All right, but why are we talking data collection and what's important about it in a classroom? Well, one of the things is that data is all around us and we're constantly exposed to it. Whether or not we know it, we're using data, we're evaluating it. And doing a data collection project is going to help your students start to really understand how to structure data so that it can be used, and also how to think critically about the quality of that data around them. Now, I really loved how Anita put this yesterday when she talked about how we let kids use real data that they create and solve real problems. And that right there is what this is about to me. Now, through this collection, they're going to not only build their own data set, step into roles as scientists, they can also become better data consumers and evaluators. And they build their skills for problem solving, for spatial reasoning, for becoming good citizens of this world, right? All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump out to a demo now, showing a simple data collection project. So what you're seeing here is a story map. And we've done one survey already a minute ago. Some of you might still be filling it out, and that's some data collection. But I mentioned that this is going to be not just data collection, but data collection projects. And here's kind of how I distinguish that. Data collection is that exercise of going out and collecting information. A data collection project takes that data and does something with it. Okay, so this is actually one of my favorite ways to introduce younger kids to GIS. And so if you scroll down in this story map, we can see the survey is embedded right here for us. Very simple survey. What is your favorite color? Where are you? That's it. Okay, so data collection and data collection projects don't have to be complex. But we have this one question, this one location. What is your favorite color? And who really can't answer that, right? Like this allows everyone to join in. I think of this as participatory GIS. Everyone can answer, play along, and get on the map. And in fact, you can see we've had quite a number of people participating in this over the last couple of months and putting their information in the map. And if we just take a quick look at the rest of this data collection project, you'll see we have a dashboard looking at the distribution of colors. You'll see that we've done some analysis with this color information, and you can scroll through and see these different things. All right, but really the key here to notice is that data collection is just the beginning. Yes, preparing, collecting data is key, but what you do with the data, what you learn, and what you share is what's really going to bring the data to life. All right, so what does it take to do a data collection project with your class? Something like that favorite color story map that we just looked at. Well, you'll need access to the software. You can use an ArcGIS for Schools bundle, which is free, and you've heard us talking about that, or a GIS Club Kit, also free, a little bit more temporary. Both of those options are going to include the software you need to do a data collection project. From there, you'll need to design your project, choose the app or tool you want to use, set it up, collect your data, and then use it, however that might be. All right. I'm going to pause for a moment here and let Tom or Charlie, any questions you guys want to jump in with here before we keep going?
Well, there were folks that were anxious to participate in it, and we've tried to let them know that we're focusing on the technique here.
Yep, we will definitely be sharing out those links I showed for those of you who want to join in and join our participatory GIS. I have to say my son checks that favorite color map fairly regularly. He likes to see how things are going. So we'll definitely get those links to you as well. All right, so what I want to do now is to make you successful doing a data collection project in your classroom. So I'm going to give 10 tips that I hope help you do that. Now, the first couple are about project design, and then we're going to jump into the technology a bit more. The tech tips are going to vary in complexity. The earlier tips are probably going to be a lot simpler. The later tips, we start to get a little bit deep. And some of the tips you'll find have both aspects, a basic level and an advanced level. So if you get something out of these first couple, great. Enjoy the others. You may hear something that inspires you to try something maybe later in your data collection project journey, or maybe sooner, right? But today, don't worry if you start to get over your head. As long as you're getting something out of a couple of these, I consider this a success for you. Now, if you've done some surveys, you've done some data collection, and these first few tips you think you can handle in your sleep, that's okay. Grab a coffee, but keep an ear on this because like I said, some of these tips are going to have multiple levels. And the farther we go, the more advanced they are going to get. All right, so the first tip is take time and design your project. Now, this is the foundation of your project, so let's spend a little bit of time on it. It also might be the hardest part, figuring out what you even want to study. From that, you're going to need to think about the question you need to ask of others, of yourself as you're making observations. You're going to need to figure out what your main study question is. You're going to need to figure out the questions that you need to know to support that question, to solve the overarching problem that you're working on. Now, keep in mind, these don't have to be too serious, right? Think of the favorite color map. Think of all those amazing videos we saw yesterday. And these can be interesting and fun projects. They can be simple, they can be complex. The students are engaged, it's a win. And they need to be designed well so that the students can be engaged and successful. Okay. There might be a problem in your students see in society that they want to understand or maybe solve. Maybe they're curious about a particular pattern they've noticed in their world. They want to investigate it. Looking at some of the things for the story maps competition that's going on isn't a great thing to look at as well. But remember not to rush this. It's powerful to have kids think about the questions they need to ask for their project. And this isn't about the technology. Keep them out of the technology. This isn't the mechanics of how do I put my questions onto the page, but more about understanding what questions to put on the page, understanding how you need to structure that information, what types of information you need. And this is actually often the part where we find kids need the most guidance. Once you hand the kids the website for Survey123, they're often running, they need very little help getting going in there. What they need help is to know what they even don't know that they don't know, right? We need to get these children to understand how to ask good project questions and how to ask the right information to get them their supporting information. So how do you get ideas for projects? Well, remember all the videos yesterday in the chat? That is a great place to start. Things like recess habits, snow depth, interviews, the things I see on a walk, a scavenger hunt. The Geo project site, that's another place to go and get some inspiration. And I mentioned on a walk, but just on a walk right now when we're all working remotely, there's quite a number of things you could look at. You could look at trash that you're seeing, plants that you're seeing, animals that you're seeing, the people that you're passing on the other side, nicely distanced, right? Okay, you can also think about ways to do data collection with friends and family members. And this can be in person and it can be over the phone. So remember, these tools are going to be available to students to use from home as well. Now, the other part of this is also planning the data that you need and its type. Okay, so as you're working on this design, remember, we're not in the technology. We're going to start on paper or even the whiteboard, build a list of what you want to know, look at the difference. Maybe your question involves different ages and how they would do something differently. Well, make sure you've asked for the age in the survey. Maybe there's an impact of gender that you're looking at. Make sure you've captured the gender, right? And again, we're not in the technology yet. So at this point, it's important to understand that the technology is going to capture location, pictures, and additional information that you design. How you actually make the list of questions, we're still not too worried about that. But what does matter right now is understanding that you can control the kinds of answers people give. For example, are you going to let them type in whatever they want, or are you going to limit the response they can provide? If you ask someone for their name, yes, text, a string, that makes sense. But if you ask how long, like when I asked all of you, how long have you been in education? How many years of experience do you have? I didn't want a string. I didn't want you to say, since after college, the last 2 decades, 2 weeks. And in this case, I even wanted to know years. So there were 2 parts of that question that I needed to make sure I thought through. And one is the type that I allowed you to provide, in which case I used a number and actually an integer, and the units. And here we looked at years. Another thing you can think about is how to restrict the answers people give you based on using a list of choices instead of that text box. And you've seen this in our surveys as well. Now, this is probably one of the most important things you can do if you want a tip on having successful data project and successfully using your survey data in a dashboard. Use your types with care. And that doesn't mean knowing necessarily exactly what you want to pick. This is where you're going to start edging into the technology. What you want to do with the data after you collect it is going to help drive the type of data you collect. So you need to start playing. You need to see how it changes what you can show on the map, how the statistics you can calculate depend on the type. The analysis you do is going to be impacted, where you can use things in a dashboard versus in a story map. This does take a little bit of playing, and it's something you want to do in the software. Explore the options and see what you can learn, right? This time spent up front is going to save you time in the long run because it's much easier to collect good data than to have to go try to clean up data that you could have collected better in the first place. So your entire goal as you're doing this design of your project question and your data is to keep in mind that you want to design for the best data you could hope for, right? That's a great way to set yourself up for success, is to restrict the information people giving you to being exactly what you want and need. Now, after you've planned out this project, make sure you test it out a bit. Run it by a few people. You'll likely end up tweaking it, and it's a lot easier to do that before you've collected a lot of data. So changes can make earlier data no longer useful. For example, if you have to change the type or add a question you've forgotten. And additionally, it's hard to get people to fill out surveys sometimes. And I'm sure you've seen this with classes if you've tried a data collection project. Just getting that engagement from others to participate can be a challenge. So don't find yourself needing to ask twice because you had to go redo it. All right, so your end goal here is to have a designed project with the questions you need to ask and the right types of answers that you'll collect to solve an overarching problem. All right, tip number 2, choose your app wisely. So with your project design, we're now ready to really get into the technology and build the project we'll use to collect the data. And the details of exactly what you need to build and use to collect that data will depend on the project you've just defined. So Esri offers 3 data collection apps: ArcGIS Survey123, ArcGIS Collector, and ArcGIS Quick Capture. All are included in both the school bundle and the GIS Club Kit. Now, be aware that later this year, Collector is going to become part of a new app called Field Maps. For those of you using it as a data collection app, don't worry about it. It's essentially the same, just getting wrapped in with some other things, and you'll be able to use it as you did before. But what are these? So Survey123 is about filling out a form. And this is the one that you've seen during this conference already, right? It's like Google Forms, with a map. You design a list of questions that need to be answered, and location, or a map, is just one of those questions you can include. Collector, on the other hand, is focused on the map. You see the data being collected around you, and you place your data onto the map. Now, along with placing it on the map, you can provide additional information, but the map is really front and center in this app. Quick capture is all about fast collection. Capture a location, maybe add a picture, and move on to the next thing to capture. This design is one where you're not going to be typing in a lot of information during the capture or the collection, but you will still be providing quite a bit of detail if you've designed your project well. It's just that you, as the project designer, need to put the packages together so that one button actually fills out quite a number of fields for the user tapping it. All right, now while all of these are used as appropriate in education, Survey123 is by far the most popular with educators. So for much of the tips and demos I do today, you'll find that they are focused on that app. All right, but knowing just your project isn't enough to help you choose which app all of the time. There are other considerations about the world in which your project is going to run and the constraints your project will face that are going to help you pick the right one of these technology pieces. Okay, if you're not going to have a network connection during data collection, all of these apps can work without one, but they do it differently. So Collector is the most flexible. You can define the area you want to work ahead of time or right before you head out to do the collection. In Survey123, you actually need to plan ahead and set those areas up beforehand. And in Quick Capture, not only do you need to plan ahead of time, but you actually also need to use some desktop software to set them up. So just a little bit bigger hurdle there. Now, while doing the data collection, will your students be asking people to fill out the survey for them? Or will they be there asking questions but doing the typing themselves? Do they want to send a link out and have people fill it out while they aren't there? Now, if you're using Survey123, you can share a link to anyone. You can have anyone fill out your survey. If you're using Collector or Quick Capture, these are tied to having logins in an ArcGIS organization. Now, for your students, that's okay, right? Because part of your school bundle, part of your GIS club kit, that is a login for each student. Your students are fine, your students at your school are fine, the teachers are fine. But what if they want to ask a neighbor, a person across the street, or maybe post a link on social media? That's when you need to start thinking about this. Now, when you're using Survey123, as you've seen earlier, you can fill that out in a browser. Or you can use an app as well. Collector and Quick Capture, on the other hand, both require an app to be installed to use them to collect data. So some people don't want to install an app to fill out one survey or one form for one project. That might be a hurdle that you face if you pick those apps. In addition, you might not be able to install apps on your school devices. So this is something to consider. All right, are you collecting new data? Do you need to edit data? Again, a couple apps can handle this. Collector does it a little bit easier than Survey123, but they can both do that. And if you're looking to do some advanced data collection methods, things like GPS averaging, where you measure a point multiple times and average it to get a single location, or snapping, where you use the location of existing data to provide location for new data, you'll want to go to Collector. But in general, education projects aren't usually in that space. And then the last one is if you have a GeoMentor, or I think some people call them a GIS, I'm not remembering the word, but we have a couple different names. Basically, this is a GIS person who, well, I think I'm as a friend of GIS, right? They're someone who's going to just come to your classroom and share their experience with you. They might be a GIS professional, a parent with experience, and they want to bring their knowledge to your classroom. So they may be more comfortable in one app than another, and you should listen to them. They're the one helping you. They may have some knowledge that you want to rely on. So that's another good resource to help you choose what app. All right, another tip in terms of your project design. We talked a little bit about how it's a project because it's more than just collecting data. And that's this other thing. You really need to incorporate analysis, storytelling, action into your project because we need to go beyond collecting data. Collecting and having the data isn't really the end goal. That's not enough. Students need to use that data, solve a problem, tell a story. They can take the information, give it meaning, turn it into knowledge, apply what they've learned. And then after collecting the data, they can analyze it, understand what your data has to say, and then help that data speak by communicating about it and with it. Now, the ways in which you can do that there are a number, right? Visual analysis is analysis. Looking at a map and making conclusions based on what you see is analysis. It doesn't have to be a tool. But let's look at this map. So this is our favorite colors map that we saw in the earlier project. And when I look at this, I can get a sense that most respondents are in North America, particularly the US, and some in Europe. I can see that they're unevenly distributed. I might even be able to relate that maybe to population and how that would play a role. But if I ask you what the most popular color is, what about the least popular? Okay, what about how the distribution of favorites is different or the same in different areas of the map? All right, I think you get what I'm getting at, right? There's a reason that we have analysis tools, and they can help us make it even better. So let's look at another map. This is one from the GeoProjects website where students go out and collect data using apps that measure noise in decibels on their phones. So you go out and you can measure how loud various areas are. And the bigger the point on the map, the louder that spot is. As you can see, in this student's work, they only collected values in some places. And that makes sense. You can't take a reading everywhere. But you might want to predict what the noise level will be at a location that wasn't measured. So just looking at the map, we can get a sense that areas near the bigger dots are likely to be louder and areas farther away from them quieter. We can do better than that. We want to look for a pattern. So we'll look in the Analyze Patterns area in the toolbox, and there we can find the Interpolate Points tool. So what that's going to do is predict values across an area based upon measured points. Great, that's exactly what I have, right? I have some measured points. I want to predict some things off it. Okay, here's our result. Now you can start to get a little bit better sense of what the noise level are going to be around the area and not just at the measured points. Now, really, we'd want more than 13 data points to get a better prediction, a smoother surface. And that's a good reminder, right? As you're creating your data collection project, you do also want to think about how much data will be enough for you to make conclusions. All right, the last part of this is, again, the technology, right? So we've learned something from our data, and we want to share it. And there's quite a number of ways in ArcGIS that you can do that. Perhaps you want others to be able to do the same visual analysis you did, and you want to share the map or a scene, which is like a 3D map. Or maybe you want to share the map in a web app that you configure or create to help your data tell its story, right? Maybe there's a narrative you want to put with the map. You can create a simple presentation that puts a shot of a map and a little bit of text together in the map viewer. Maybe you want to create a dashboard and let others explore your data and see the connections it has for themselves. Maybe you want to create a more complex narrative and you need a story map for that. You can even use some of these in conjunction with others. Like you saw earlier, right? We had a dashboard within a story map. Now, two of the most popular tools within education are story maps and dashboards. And since in just a minute, we're going to have a session on story maps, I'm going to focus on dashboards. All right, so we're going to jump out now. And let's take a look, first of all, at the survey that you guys filled out at the beginning of this. I'm going to go ahead and refresh and let's see, because one of the questions I asked is which parts of the dashboard would you want to see how it was created? And so what I was doing there is using this survey to help see what I should look at now. So let's see what you guys asked for. All right, I think here's an example. First of all, I'm going to back up a little. Let us explore this a little. Here's when you enter a word. When I say data collection, what one word comes to mind? It's kind of interesting to see we have research, fieldwork. Survey123 is a big one, right? Because that's what's on all of our minds. This is great. So, but again, I ask for a string, which word, and we get quite a variety of answers, right? Keep that in mind. Where is data collection about? Good, my leading question, right? Start you guys thinking. Data collection's done everywhere. Let's not restrict ourselves to thinking it has to be in a specific place, all right? Okay, and what do we want to see how it's made? So the map was a popular one, okay? The bar charts got some, the cumulative years of teaching, the sessions to see, the pie charts, the list, Okay, so let's see. Let's check out the list. What else in here? Okay, and then the survey code. Oh, that grade drop down. That's actually a pretty cool one. Let's go ahead and look at that. And then I want to do one pretty simple one. We can use, we'll use the bar chart for that. Let's look at a bar chart. I'm just writing that down so that we make sure we look at the right things in a minute. Now, these have a tendency to refresh on me, so let's make sure we're up to date here. So this is our dashboard as we looked at it the other day. And in here, you can see, as you've all seen, right, this information that we presented. And so we're gonna look at how you make this bar chart down here. We'll look at how you do the list, and we'll look at this grade selector up in the corner. Now, I'm intentionally not gonna look at the map. And the reason for that is most of the interesting stuff done with this map, we're gonna look at a little bit later in a later tip. And so I'm gonna leave that for there. This map, so that you know, is just a web map that you make in ArcGIS Online. When I create the dashboard, the first thing I did is I put a map into it, and that map is bringing in all the data. So let's jump into the bar chart. Let me go. All I'm doing here when I change tabs is I'm changing from the URL we use to view the dashboard to add edit at the end. So now I'm in the mode where I can actually edit this dashboard. What you'll see is now when I hover, I get these little helpers and I can do things, okay? So I can configure these different components. I could move them around if I wanted to and reorder them. That's not what I want to do right now though. So let's start with this bar chart and let's just jump in and configure it. So when you configure in dashboard, you have quite a bit of control over these objects. Now, the first thing I want to draw your attention to is this. This is really important. You pick your data and I'm going to click change on just so you can see, but this is going to show me that map that I added and the layers available in it. Now, in this case, I have one layer in my map, so that was pretty easy to pick. You can also filter that data if there's more in your map than you really want to be talking about, right? This is your chance to say, hey, I know this data. I want to create the experience I want for it. Okay, and we talked a little bit about in the plenary, a bit about that in the plenary. Okay, so we've linked to our data. Now, that's really the power of the dashboard, is that it can take that data that's coming in and link it to other controls. And in here, pretty much all I had to do was say, I want to use grouped values. That means something that's in multiple answers. And the one I'm interested in is the grade level focus. Okay, now I can choose from quite a number of fields in here. You can see all the different string fields that I had available in my survey are showing up here, as well as some of our numeric fields. Now, in here, you can flip through and look at the different things. One thing I took the time to do in this particular chart is to customize this label a little bit so that it would read nicely. And so you can do that. You can specify what your labels are and how they appear. You can also specify the colors used. And I did take the time to do that here because one of my goals was I wanted the chart column to match the color in the map so that you got familiar to kind of using that color for that choice. And then we can put a title to it. Now, in this case, I didn't do any actions. We'll see this in one of the other examples in the list, actually. We'll look at that. But what that does is it lets, when you do something here, it change other things, right? That whole idea that our whole dashboard was interactive, right? And when I clicked on things, something would happen elsewhere. So a great example of that is the grade selector, which is what we'll look at next. So if you remember, when we clicked on this, we could say, for example, I want to see high school, and click the high school option. And it filters all the different things we see down to be about the high school audience, okay? We'll go ahead and uncheck that, and let's go ahead and go in here and see how that's configured. Okay, in this case, again, because we're still looking at those grade levels, just like we were in the bar chart, that's grouped values. It's something that's in our data, but we want to put it into buckets, basically. We said, take all of the features that have this value of say, elementary or middle school or high school, and every answer that has that part, put them in buckets together. It's a sorting exercise, right? And we specify that that's the grade level focus is what we care about. Okay, and so these are our buckets of data, but really the power in selectors which is what this kind of thing is called, where it kind of, you select something and it affects the rest of your dashboard, is these actions. Now you'll see I am filtering quite a number of elements in this dashboard based on that selector. And that makes sense, right? Because if we go back and we look, there's a lot of pieces here. And as soon as I picked high school, all of them changed to reflect it, right? So that's the value there. That's really the key, is that action. So based on what I picked, that bucket of data I've created that all has high school in it, I want to use that to select all of the data, and I'm going to ignore everything else while that's chosen. All right, the last one we're going to look at here is this list. And this one is, well, I want to look a lot at the interactive abilities here, right? So let me jump back and remind you what that was. So if I click on one of the entries in the list, you see the map center on it, you see a pop-up about that area show, and you see that point flash on the map. So we have a couple of interactions happening. And that was done through, similar to how the selector works, through the actions. Okay, so in this case, I'm showing a pop-up, I'm flashing the feature, and I'm panning the map. So I choose the different types of actions I want, and then from there, you can pick where you want to be doing it. In this case, of course, they're all on the map. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this list is that you have complete control over how it looks. All right, so ignore this block right here for a moment. Just don't worry about it. I want you to look first at this line item template. So what this is it's saying, it's designing what I want this to look like. I have the name and it's bold. The curly braces around that mean pull this out of the feature and use whatever the value is in that field. Okay, and that's how we get Janet's name here and Rosa's name here and Jenny's name here. All right, we have also our grade focus, and that's coming in. We have, here you can see I've set a color on something. That's why a color appears on that interest. So you can do a mix of text, of color, structure. We have an image and we've set it off to the side. So a lot of this is just done right here by using the values from the data and pulling them in. Now this chunk at the top that I said to ignore is called Arcade. So what Arcade is it's basically a programming language you can use to do some visual work with your data. And in this case, because there were certain things in the dashboard that weren't set up in ways that there are things set up in the survey that weren't set up in ways that were extremely available to the dashboard, I did have to do some processing. So one example of that is the interests. I had just a list of top interests. And we all know with the rankings, well, at least I don't always rank every single one. Maybe you guys do, but I tend to do a couple, and then maybe 4, 5, and 6 are about even. And so I didn't want to look at all of those interests. Instead, I thought, well, the top 2 are often ranked well. So let's focus on those. And so what I did is I was able to use Arcade to create new values that then down here, I was able to access. And so that's why you see this expression interest list display. So that means use the expression from the Arcade that was this, that you made. All right, now again, that's not necessary. That's kind of one of those bonuses where we're getting a little bit deeper. And if you really want to start to go all out, that's one of the places to do it. And Arcade is pretty powerful. All right, so I do have a couple extra tips while we're looking at a dashboard here. Someone asked the other day for some tips on surveys and dashboards and making them work well together. So one of those is, like I've said, if we've designed our data well, that's the biggest tip I can give you. That alone is going to make it so much easier to create, excuse me, stunning dashboards that you'll be able to share. Another one is to pay attention to the names that you use for your choices in Survey123, because you'll find that everything there is string fields that you're storing. And so then you come into dashboard and the sorting of those things is based on strings. So one thing I like to do, and we can look at this quickly by jumping in here. I'm not going to actually publish, but what this is doing is it's going to let us see the schema of the survey of that welcome survey we did. And you can see that when you picked a grade level focus, I actually named those fields to start with a number. And the reason I did that was exactly this, because when I jump out of this, let's go ahead and go back, and I come back into my dashboard, I wanted these to be in the order I wanted them. So by putting that number at the beginning, I could give a sort order to my chart. So that's one thing. Pay attention to where you may want to order things and maybe be a little bit proactive in your naming to make that easier. And just keep in mind, strings are pretty limited, right? It's hard, you can't really do statistics. It's a little bit hard to do charts, right? You have a string field, and so we can do things like display a string. But other than that, it gets a little bit tricky. All right, so we can create dashboards. And the reason we want to do this, to jump back into where we were at, is because we're communicating, right? We're doing data collection to take it, to learn something, and to share that information. All right, I'm going to breathe again. Charlie, Tom?
Well, wow, lots of people are commenting about things that you've got in here. The selector item was a big thing for some people. And then also a question about if you need to process the list in Arcade, or could you just have it list the first and second? Not
Great.
sure.
So yep, so that's a great question. Really what it comes down to is the field that you get when you're using Survey123 and doing a ranking or a multiple choice. It's a single field with comma delimited data. And the problem with that is that comma delimited data is not really native to the ArcGIS ecosystem, right? So there's no way to say, hey, show me the first two, because it just knows, hey, I have a bunch of data. It's a string, right? There's no way to really know what that is. So what Arcade does is it gives me the ability to run some functions that really just does. It says grab the first two things in the Arcade was basically saying, this is comma delimited data. Give me the first two pieces. It's just the way that you interface between the fact that you know what that data is and that it's not just any string, and that ArcGIS didn't know that yet when you're outside of Survey. All right, good one. All right, tip number 4. Now we're getting a little bit more into the technology again. I know that dashboard when it was like, okay, we're talking about the project design, but we're going to dive into some big tech. That's okay. I hope you had fun. We will back it up a little bit right now. Author your survey in the web designer. So as I mentioned, Survey123 is the most popular in education. It's what we're going to cover today. So when you do this, the best way to author is often the simplest tool. So you can come in and let's see, we already added some fields here. Let me just go back and let's just create a new survey. And this is what you would do. And you just give it your name and a tag and hit create. Now, the reason you want to use the web designer is you're going to get a nice drag and drop, simple but powerful experience. Okay. The other choices you have is Survey123 does have an app component for authoring called Connect. And then you can also, when you're filling out the survey, fill it out either in the web or in a mobile app. But when you're in the Survey123 designer here in the website, it's a great authoring experience. For example, in our survey for this session, we had a map, and we can just drag and drop our map and add our question. Right, so that's it. My map is now ready to go. It can collect data. I can also add on here, let's see, what else did we have? We had a string, so let's put some text on here. I always miss that spot. And it was one word for data collection, the one word you think of, right? And we can add that on in. And then additionally, we had some choices that you could make. And to do that, we're going to do a single choice, and we'll add that in here. All right, now one of the cool things I do want to show you guys with that single choice, so the reason I'm taking a second is I'm copying some information. Because you have a choice here, haha, pun not intended. You can type in option 1 and continue that way, or you can hit this batch edit button and provide all your choices by pasting. And it's just a great way to, if you have designed on a whiteboard, a Word doc, whatever you've used, to get those choices on in there. And when you say okay, you'll see that it honors those. And that's really it. So the other thing to keep in mind, as you saw in the plenary, sharing of these surveys is important, right? Because the only people who can access it is the people you give access to. And I always do this. We have to save before we go there, and we have to publish first. So we'll jump back in, we'll click publish, and we can get our survey to be live. Now, while it's publishing, it's just getting everything spun up and created and ready for us to use. It includes creating the services that will collect the data, following this format that you've specified. All right, we'll give it just a second here. And really all I wanted to say here was that when you go into Collaborate, you can specify who can fill out your survey and who can access the data that's been submitted. Okay, so just something to be aware of. It follows the ArcGIS Online sharing model. And for those of you who don't know, basically you can share with a couple different ways. You can share with the world to everyone. You can share with your organization, which means everyone under that same organization, or you can share with particular groups. And so that's part of the choices you'll need to make while you're in here. All right, got to start picking up the speed. I'm getting too excited here and into the depths. Customize your pop-ups, that's our next one. And this is where we'll talk a little bit about what I think is the most important part in setting up your map when you're using it to share your information and your data, which is making a really clean pop-up, because the pop-up is the information that your reader is going to see and interact with in your map. Okay, and I'm going to show Map Viewer Beta for this, and there's a reason for that. So while we're in here, this is the same map that my dashboard was using. And to edit the pop-ups now, I come over here and I click Configure Pop-up. And one of the things that's new is the fact that I can have multiple different sections in here and I can change the order of them to be the way I want it. Now you can't do that in the classic map viewer, but most of the rest of these things I'm about to talk about that you do within the pop-up, you can do. So I chose to show it here because I have been waiting forever to be able to put my attachments where I want it and between different attributes, and now I finally can. So let's look at this pop-up. And actually first, let's go ahead and look at one on the map so we can see what we're creating. Okay, you can see some nice text here. Remember, this is a survey that was designed to pretend you were turning and saying hi to someone. When I turn and say hi to someone, I don't in my head picture a table of data that I need to read off to them. I think in sentences. Hey, who am I? How many years have I been in education? Where do I work? Okay, who am I? Where's my face? And that's why I like having the attachments come earlier. Because before I get into some of the optional parts of the survey, I would want to see who I'm talking to. All right, now in doing that, you'll see that we use these curly braces around the field name. And what that does is pulls that information just like it did in the dashboard when we looked at the list. You're doing the same thing here. So you're saying, go grab that attribute and put it into this spot. Now, one thing you'll notice in here is that I do have these expression 0 type things. And we will look at that for just a second. And you'll find, just like we found in the dashboard, that what these are doing is, guess, arcade, right? So you can take your data and do some processing, some work on it before you display it. For example, in this case, if you remember when we asked about GIS experience in the survey, let's just go ahead and look, we had quite a long string as the label because I needed to give you some context as good survey design about what I was really asking. What did I mean by beginner? Because what you mean might be different. So that was important in my survey. I didn't want to leave that out. But now when I'm using that data, I don't need it to say, I'm a beginner, I've used, or I'm interested in using maps. I just want it to say beginner because I've already set that context. So here what I can do is I can grab that piece of information and say, hey, take everything after that parentheses. I don't want any of that. Just get rid of it and lowercase this whole thing because I'm putting it in a sentence. Okay, so that's kind of that little bit deeper look, right? Again, the pop-ups is something where there's a basic level tip, which is please customize it. Please don't just use a default list. Please think about, even if you want an attribute display, which attributes do you want included? You don't have to list all of them and often shouldn't. In here, I have left the attribute display in as well, simply for purposes of showing that. And so again, if we look, you can see that after my nice layout, there is just the table. And sometimes this is the right display for your information, but it might not need everything. Or maybe it's the right display for 5 of your fields, whereas the others should be earlier. And you can choose which of those that you're displaying in which way. Okay, so you can pick that in and out. Now, like I said, this is the beta map viewer, but these things are things you can do in the map viewer today as well, with the exception of this splitting of text, having both text and attribute and attachment and changing the order. That's the new pop-ups. So they're very powerful. I suggest starting to play with them now. They've been quite fun. Okay, next tip, number 6, capture your data. Now, your is capitalized because to me, that's the key here, is it's what you want for your project. So think of this as the technical part that goes with part 1B, right? Plan the data you need and its type. This is how you implement that plan. Okay, so you planned it. You decided what types of data you needed, what types of answers you wanted. Now, how do you get people to actually give that to you? So let's take a look. So one of the first things we'll look at in here is this red star. So what that means is that that field is required. You cannot submit this survey if you have not provided a name or nickname. Now you may think, well, I'd really like all of this filled out. I'll just make everything required. Have you ever filled out one of those surveys where you start and it just keeps going and going, and finally maybe you just close the tab and move on with your day? Well, if everything has stars by it, that's your choice. You can close the tab and move on with your day. If I have designed my survey well, though, first of all, I wouldn't get bored filling it out. But secondly, I could leave some things blank. Maybe I don't have a good answer. I'm not interested, or that part doesn't apply to me. If it's not required, they don't have to fill it out and they can still submit. So use required if you can tell yourself, if they don't put that data, I don't want any data from them. Okay, and that's a pretty strong statement, but really think about it. All right, another thing we talked about was being able to specify the type of information you want. So here we've used a number. And again, you saw this when we looked at the editing experience just a minute ago. There are quite a number of types of data you can pull in. And in that number, in addition, we have said it has to be an integer. And if I wanted, I could even have minimum and maximum values. So what you're seeing here is this, it's kind of like the metadata to my survey, right? I am specifying what's allowed and what isn't allowed. And the better job I do, the better information I'll get back. Now, we also talked about with the number that with it also went units, right? And there's no way I can say make the person enter years, because I don't know if a 1 means a year or a day. But what I can do is I can include my expectation for the user here. And the way that is done is by providing a hint. And it's just a text box. I can put whatever I need in here. And in fact, I would probably be likely to make that bold to stand out a little bit so that people notice it's years. Another thing we've used in here is this guy right here. It's called the Likert scale. And one of the great things is it shows a progression and a relationship between the answers that you don't get when you're just using a single choice. This shows a scale, and people will read it that way. You also, in this survey, had a conditional question. What that means is on this question, I actually set a rule. And the rule I did said, if someone says yes, I will rank my subject focus areas, then show them the ranking question. Now, the reason I did that actually comes back to a limitation in the ranking question that the Survey123 team is working on. But that is, if you have one, it always writes an answer to your database, which may not be what you want if it's an optional question, because then how do you know if someone filled it out or if they chose not to answer? So that's why I've kind of put that layer in there of putting it behind a conditional. That way, if someone says, yes, I will fill that out, then I want that data written in to use it. And the one other thing that's really cool when it comes to thinking about your data and how to design a good survey, when you're doing a ranking question, the choices are actually showed in a random order. So if you were to take the survey again, your choices would be presented differently to you. And the reason why that's really cool is that people don't read all the options necessarily in a survey. And there's a bias toward the first couple answers. And by presenting them randomly to each person who fills it out, you'll get away from a little bit of that bias. All right, my next tip. We're starting to get a little bit deeper here. And with that, we won't go quite as in-depth when talking. I am going to provide links to these, but you are going to be a little bit more on your own. Now, that said, I love this stuff, okay? I have the coolest job in the world because my job is to help you as teachers be successful doing cool projects. Like, really, what could be better? Have a great idea and I can help you with it. So remember, I've given you some links here, but also reach out to us on the schools team as you need to. So let's look at hosted feature layer views. So what a hosted feature layer view is it takes your feature service or your feature layer that you've created for your survey, and it pretends to be a new layer, but it's not really. It's using the same underlying data, but you can control what's available. So let me just show you that. So here we are at the layer used for the survey. And I've gone ahead and created a view layer already, so we don't have to wait. And what's really interesting here is that I can change in the visualization tab and in the settings what I can do with this. Now in the settings, the key one is editing, right? Because my main layer needs to be editable. But when I'm using this layer, say in a presentation, in a web app, in a dashboard, I may not want people editing it, or especially editing on accident. So I can just remove editing. I've turned that off for this view. The other cool thing that I can do is when I'm setting the view definition, I can define features and fields to include. For example, if I wanted to let this go to maybe the high school audience, I could define my features so that they're only included if they have a grade level of high school. This map would look very different, and it's different than filtering. So the difference in filtering is that data is still part of the layer. And if someone was to add it to a new map or change your filter, they can get past that. In a hosted feature layer view, it's like its own whole layer. If I come in and I define the fields and I say, you know what, I don't want any of the creation info, I don't want a name, I just want to know maybe their GIS experience and what they want to see. And if I turned everything else off, none of the rest would be available. So I didn't quite turn all of it off now, but it should give you an idea, and you can see a much shorter pop-up. Just those things I've left in. And this isn't because I've filtered them out. It's because I've actually made it so it's a hosted feature layer view, but it's really just a layer that has different settings. And there's no way for me to access, it's no way for me as not the owner of this layer to start using this layer in a way that the owner of the layer does not want it used. All right. Okay, I know just a few tips ago, I said author in the web designer. So why am I now saying author in Survey123 Connect? Well, remember, we're getting the deeper tips, right? We're at that 8, 9 kind of time. You can do more for your data when using Survey123 Connect. So we're just gonna look at it really quick. So here's what Survey123 Connect looks like. It's an app that you install instead of a web experience. And really what's happening is that there's a spreadsheet, and this spreadsheet is filled out with information that actually creates this whole form. Now, there are things you can do that you can't do in the web browser. So for example, we can look here in column J, and you can see that there is a default value that uses a function. Okay, well in here, you can see the date is there. Oh, the date's also not editable. That's also something that you're getting from Connect. You can say that that field is read-only. Another thing that's pretty interesting in here is that you can give languages. So I can have one data set, but depending on who's viewing my survey, I can have them see it in the appropriate language. Now you can still fill out most of these surveys in the web. So here's the same survey, and you'll notice, nope, I can't edit that date. Here's the time also being set. Now it's not quite right now on my clock, but that's because I haven't reloaded the page. And you can go in and you can see, okay, we have one of the questions that appears and disappears, and you can do a lot of that in the web, but not all of it, right? Getting that today's date and not editable, it can be very powerful. And it's also powerful to be able to change your survey to another language to best serve your audience that you're targeting when filling it out. The last thing I want to mention about Connect that's really powerful is it's also a mechanism for sharing surveys. So because it's done in that spreadsheet, it's called an XLS form standard. You could take that spreadsheet, save it, take that, and then email it to someone, share it in some other way to another teacher perhaps, or so that each student had their own copy that they could customize and publish. And this is going to be like sharing a lesson plan. You're not sharing the data, you're not sharing access to the data, you're not sharing your org. When they hit publish, they get their own survey. Okay, all right, I've got to speed up. So take maps offline with Survey123. Now I mentioned this was a little bit complicated, more so than in Collector, and had a little bit more limitations. However, we have a story map that takes you through the whole process. In a nutshell, you'll create your survey, create map areas, link them together, download and use. The complicated part is that these things happen in different places, right? But don't worry, I'll get you the link for this. You can scroll through. It has videos that'll show you, as well as the steps beside it, to take you through the entire process, including where you need to be doing your work. All right, and our last tip, webhooks and Integromat. Now, if that was like German, don't worry. It's kind of a black box to me still as well. But what happens is you can set up things to automatically happen. For example, on submission of a survey. So have you ever wanted to be notified when someone fills out your survey? Well, now you can, okay? So when you go in here to Integromat, it's a website. You need to create an account. There is a free option. That's what I use. If you use a ton of it, you may have to end up getting an account. I have not had to yet. But you can do things like say, okay, when a survey is submitted, send me an email. You can specify the subject. And what's really powerful, you have access to all the data of that survey. So for example, I want to pull in the name of the person who submitted it, their grade level focus, any of those things that we've talked about, you can access and use in your email. Now, since you can do that, if you've had them enter an email address, imagine you can also send them a confirmation email, right? You can use it to even process data. So emails aren't the only thing you can do. If you look at Integromat, there are quite a number of different things you can connect with. I haven't even explored half of these myself, but basically, you can do all these things and have the submission of a survey trigger other things to happen. And that to me is just kind of like opens a lot of doors, right? Because now all of a sudden you have all this power and you can even do HTTP requests. So one of the things I've done in the past and actually use in your in the attendee survey that we have is processing each survey as it's submitted to create some specialized fields because the survey structure didn't quite match what my dashboard wanted. So there are things I'm not doing in Arcade that I handled through Integromat instead. All right, and if you've got those 10 tips and don't even need all of them, you are ready for the ArcGIS Schools competition. But in particular, keep in mind all those project design tips, right? Because what I'd really love to see next year in the ArcGIS Schools competition is some amazing data collection paired with analysis, paired with storytelling, and all those wow moments and the light bulb moments, right? I do want to make a quick note about PII, personally identifiable information. When doing data collection, this is a concern. You can have students use a nearby intersection instead of their true location. You can remind students not to do their collection at or in their homes, but instead while they're on their walks. But those are kind of on the person creating the data to do, and not all students will remember. So you, as the teacher or the admin, can also think about who's allowed to view the data that has been collected. You can consider things like using analysis to kind of blur your data. I say blur, but I really mean just kind of anonymize it a little bit, just using some tools there. All right, here's a whole bunch of links. And I know we're pretty much at time right now, but I want to turn it back to Charlie, see if there's anything else, or Tom.
No, I think everybody just was anxious for these links, and there are probably some people taking a screenshot or getting their phone camera to take a picture of it right away.
Yeah,
So
and
great timing.
Just as a reminder, on this slide, you find a lot of the links that I kind of referenced but didn't go deep into.